There are a few thousand people that have it out there, yeah.
All right. Chinese company says, you know what? We're going to make this for free because it's a communist country and the government will subsidize it. We're going to make this drug for free and give it out just to Chinese citizens who are dying of it. What would Vertex do? And what would Biden do?
Can't do much. I think they're doing it in India, and I think they're doing it in China. Although China's tried to set aside, it's become a richer country. They've tried to set aside some amount of funds for drugs like this. And what they do, Josh, that's interesting, because I've dealt with this, is they'll say to the American company, listen, the market for your drug in China isn't that big, even if it is.
Right.
And we have one price we're willing to pay, and you either take it or you leave it, because if you take it, we'll pay you the money. It's good money. But if you leave it, you will not ever get a dime from us. We're not going to negotiate. This is the price. And guess what the price is? They don't say 300,000. They
Well, that's
say
right.
something like 20,000.
Right.
And they say you're getting a decent deal here because you're going to sell your drug around the world, mostly in the US in this case, but all around the world. And you're going to do fine. And if you want a little bit more revenue, this is the price we're willing to pay. China's not that rich of a country per capita.
Right. Yeah.
We can afford and are willing to afford to take care of these people. But it's 20 grand. And if you want to do business on those terms, we'll do it. And if you don't, we won't. In India, they go a step further and they say, we're never doing it. Your patent is a piece of toilet paper to us. And we're coming out with the drug from Indian manufacturers, and we don't give a shit what you have to say. And
Now,
we're never paying 300,000 or 20,000 or 5,000 because we can make it for 30 cents here. We got great, talented chemists. Pound sand.
now, I should point out to you that despite what you probably have figured this out. You seem like you would have. Maybe some of your listeners, and certainly a lot of people who see my tweets, don't understand. I'm not a fucking Maoist. I'm not a Leninist. I'm not a what? Do you know the term tanky?
No, I don't.
Tankies are what people like me on the left, who are definitely on the left. I am on the far left, relatively speaking. Tankies are the people who are like, wouldn't it be great if everything was run the way that Mao did during the Great Leap Forward? Or wouldn't it be great if we ran things the way Stalin did?
Oh, jeez.
They're the left equivalent of the far, like the people who are like, Julius Evola had the right idea. We should just go back to having slaves and empire.
Mm.
The neo monarchists and the dark enlightenment, the fringe.
Sure.
Right? Tankies are the left version of that. It's the broad brush that people paint of somebody like me because I say, I think that medicine should be funded by the government. And then people are like, why do you want Maoism or Leninism? And it's like this idea that everybody on the left wants everything to be gray and miserable, and you're in a farm, you're working on a farm, even though you're a scientist and whatever that bullshit. Which, by the way, I personally think that has more to do with Russian culture than it does with communism, because Russia is rabidly capitalist now, and they're still miserable ass, morose, vodka drinking motherfuckers who dress in black. It did not get any better. The Chinese are grumpy as fuck. It doesn't matter how much Hong Kong infects the mainland, but this, to me, is an example of what state power can be used for in the service of good. Now, maybe the Chinese government is corrupt. Of course, they're corrupt. There is no thing as a non-corrupt government. The same way a perfect communist Marxist state would be just as corrupt as a perfect capitalist free market state. And the answer in both cases is none, because neither one can actually exist, right? We both agree that there's no perfect free market and there's no perfect communism, right?
Sure, agree.
But when you think about it, if you're Chairman G and you have the choice between having a few thousand less dead children and telling an American company to go fuck themselves because you know that they are so desperate to manufacture and do other business in your market that you're willing to toe the line at them, that seems like that's actually the kind of socialism that I'm in favor of.
No, it's smart for all parties, right?
And I suspect it's not just China. I suspect the NHS probably does a lot of the same thing.
They do. They don't pay full price.
Whatever the French, Les Health System International, and the Germans, Dr. kind of Guten or whatever the fuck it is, they all do the same thing. The only place in the civilized, developed world that basically lets the insurance companies and, to be blunt, kind of the pharma companies dictate terms is the land of the free and the home of the brave, where these
Well,
children in
let me
Oklahoma.
tell you why I don't think that's such a bad thing. Because, and you're a journalist, I'm not. And by the way, us on the right have almost no fondness for journalism left. But the real journalists do a great service. I, again, you may have zero interest in this, but there are people that work at Vertex and they're human beings. And they don't want a kid to die of cystic fibrosis, or an adult for that matter, to die of cystic fibrosis. And they know, in fact, the book that was written about Vertex, which I don't know how voracious of a reader you are, but if you have time to read it's called The Antidote. And very rarely in pharma do we even call drugs cures or antidotes, because they're usually about a 10, 20, 30% improvement in your symptoms of nasal rhinitis or some bullshit like that.
But I get you. No, yeah, sure.
But this thing's really the fucking antidote. It's really the cure. And that's why it costs $300K. There isn't a person, I would venture to tell you this, because I know a lot of people that worked at Vertex. And as I mentioned, I hired a bunch. There isn't a soul at Vertex that wants somebody to die of cystic fibrosis.
Of course not.
And what they try to do, and this is where the rubber hits the road, and you're not going to love the answer, and I'm not going to love the answer. What they try to do is they have a indigent patient care support center. They have a copay assistance program. They have we call them PAPs, patient assistance program, and they never really worked. They
No,
never really worked perfectly,
no.
but
My mom gets drugs with the coupons and all that. Yeah, I know. It's as far as I'm concerned, it's window dressing, right?
it's more than the coupons, though. They'll if you're Vertex, and I don't know where every company's different. Our company, we took it seriously. Not every company takes it seriously, because sometimes the diseases they treat aren't that serious, or at least as serious as something like this. But in my opinion, if you are dealing with the life or death of a human being as a pharma company, and you know that your cost of goods sold is $50 or $100 or whatever, and you are holding back a drug from a patient that doesn't have insurance, I think, and I hate the criminal justice system, but I think not only is that horribly negligent, but it's arguably close to a crime for crying out loud.
Absolutely.
And
And if
and
you
it does
think and if you think
it's
that paying off people and doing charitable work will cost you less than the class action lawsuit, because we know that you're not going to ever see a day in prison for that. At very worst, you might pay a fine or do a class action lawsuit. And if the cost benefit analysis, as our unnamed narrator in Fight Club says about car accidents, if the cost of fines or a lawsuit is less than the cost of doing this, then it's what you'll do.
But what if I told you that there are companies like Vertex and the companies that I managed, where there are principled people that say to these patient assistance groups, and they say to the other people who you mentioned would not get an award because they wouldn't, they'd say, listen, here's the battle plan, guys. And I talk like that because I'm a douchebag.
Sure.
I'll go into a conference room and say, here's the battle plan. We have 70% of our customers are insured by commercial insurance, 15% are insured by Medicaid, and 10% are, 70, 15, and 10. 10% are Medicaid, 10% Medicare. And then some smart aleck raises his hand and said, Martin, what about the other five? So I take a deep breath and I say, part of me wants to fire the guy,
I've
but
seen
part of
this
me,
meme. The guy goes out the window in the third panel. Yeah,
right? Part of me wants to do that. But then I said, and if it were some other disease, I would say, yeah, throw them out the window. But the other part of me says, okay, there's 5% of people, according to your math, maybe it's 10, maybe it's more, that can't get our drug. And that's a problem because this drug happens to save your life. It doesn't get your dick hard. It doesn't lower
sure.
your quote unquote ADHD. It does something, it doesn't lose you pounds with the Ozempic GLP ones, right? This is an important fucking thing. It's not one of those. And we sort of sit there and say, okay, well, we probably have to do something about this. One, because it's the right fucking thing to do. But two, Because what if a guy like you shows up and says, "Hey, Johnny Smith, 8 years old, he died because you're too greedy." And oh, guess what? We're a $5 billion publicly traded company. I think we can let Johnny Smith get his damn drug. And so, what we should do is you, since you asked the fucking question, I'm going to make you go head up the team that does this, and you're going to hire 15 people, and you're going to make sure not a goddamn person, so long as they don't have insurance, and so long as they don't have Medicaid or Medicare, not a goddamn person doesn't get this drug that needs it. And there are companies that do that, Josh. There aren't. It's not ever present in pharma, and obviously there are diseases, as you know. I think you're suffering from one that, well, they're not a death sentence today, and they're not, you know, dry eye, which is the disease the pharmaceutical industry invented. Um,
Right.
we've invented a couple of them. Restless leg syndrome, ADHD is largely a pharma-defined disease. But this is a real thing. This is a real life at stake. None of these companies want to do that. I mean, they try pretty hard. Again, I'd be curious how many people at Vertex, how many human beings did they let not get their drug for cost reasons? I pray that the answer is zero, but I know it's not.
Right.
I I know because I know from my own company that that was my directive to my team. But then they started putting stuff in like, well, you have to be this percent above the poverty line of your income. And I'm sitting here saying, so let me get this straight. The guy that is making $26,000 a year in Alabama, he's X percentage of the poverty line. You got to get his proof of income,
Right.
which is what the fuck, right?
Right.
What's he going to do? Send you his W 2? And yeah, the answer is actually yes. He's going to send you his W 2, which who wants to do that? It's an invasion of privacy. It's a shit show. But until he's proven he's actually poor,
Right. And this is all the thing. But let's go back to something here that this is interesting. Okay, so we're talking about this cystic fibrosis drug. You said $50 a dose. They're charging, what did you say it was, 70 or 300,000?
300,000. Yeah,
Now, what if the invisible hand of government, the American government, came to them and said, you know what? Uh, we're going to need you to sell that for $100 a dose. Doesn't matter what you want to sell it for.
sure.
You have to sell it for $100 a dose. Would they?
Catastrophe.
It'd be a catastrophe. Would they continue to make it?
Ooh, good question. Um, well, at some price, probably not 100, but at some price, the answer is yes.
But if it was, let's say, just twice what the cost of it, basically they make 100% profit, they would probably stop, right?
I think so. Yeah.
That's exactly what my fucking tweet was, Martin.
Well, here's the thing, Josh.
It's exactly
The
that
re
statement.
well,
It's exactly
it's
what I
not.
said.
Well, this you're a musician. I grew up on rock and roll. I played in a rock band. As you know from CDs or record deals, which are a lot more trivial than life-saving drugs, it's not the cost of the plastic of the damn, CD. That's the cost of making the music. There's producers, there's samples, there's all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That comes into play. So the actual margin of the music industry is not 97% and now 100% because it's digital distribution, but it's more like 20%. And pharma is the same way.
Right.
The research costs something. It's
But
not it's not an arm and a leg
no, no,
like I
no.
like to tell
I,
you.
I won't deny that. But what I'm saying is initially you said that my tweet story was wrong.
Sure.
It's not wrong. You're just saying that I don't understand why it's right, why it should be right.
Well, I'm not going to debate those semantics, but what I'll say that's more, I think, more important and more to the point is that if this invisible hand did that, the other costs of the business, which are not just the production costs of the medicine, there's other people there. There's an HR guy there. There's a tax guy there. There's a lawyer there. There probably should be. There's a guy who has to check the manufacturing is done right. There's a guy who has to talk to the
I
FDA.
understand. I understand how manufacturing works, and there's marketing, which is a thing that I've never seen an ad for Entresto. I've
Well,
never
what's
seen a
interesting,
billboard.
there are ads for Entresto, but what's interesting about Kaleido and the rest of Vertex's drugs is there are not only no ads for them, they don't have to do $1 of marketing because every pulmonologist on the planet knows that a company cured cystic fibrosis.
That's the
Because
thing is the marketing. Whenever people try to bring that up to me, that's a cost. I'm thinking to myself, yeah, for your Viagra knockoff,
for
maybe,
crummy drugs, for
but
really
that's not what
crummy
I'm talking
drugs,
about, right? There
you
and
got to push them.
and from the articles that I people kept sending me after I tweeted this. So I know that a lot of R&D is, for example, it's a tax write off. Not all of it, but a lot of it. Um,
Oh, it's 100% tax write off because it's a cost.
right. So and then you can also have it subsidized, right?
Sometimes, not a ton.
Sometimes, right? But and a lot of research begins with government funded research. That's what.
Arguably, I would say, well, this was a specific situation that was unusual, but I will say this. The Vertex cystic fibrosis success was
Mhm.
one of the biggest home runs in pharmaceutical history. They're making a bloody fortune. They've recouped their R&D cost. I would venture to say on a cash basis already, and this drug's going to sell for a long time to go. On a cash basis already 40 times over. That's the cost of the discovery, the clinical trials, etc.
Right.
The production cost is de minimis. And they will recoup it by a probably 500 fold. They hit a home run.
Now the researchers and the people who actually did the invention. Um, do you know offhand? Are they shareholders? Are they getting a dividend off of this?
I am so happy you asked that because I was one of the first, and in fact, unfortunately, I believe the only drug company ever to give the chemists a percentage cut, very small percentage cut, but a percentage cut of the medicine. I have a series of patents that I'm an inventor on, and my other two fellows that are on there, I saw one of them in the audience earlier. I said, "You guys are great, and I want to make the right incentives at our company. I'm giving you a permanent 1% royalty of any dollar this drug sells, which could be hundreds of millions of dollars. So 1% royalty could make you rich." And I had a friend who went to college with, there's these three guys, there's actually four guys who went to Harvard Law who are all black and they're sort of friends. And I was friends with one of them who I won't name, who's a Wall Street guy. But the other friends were Barack Obama, ironically, Ken Frazier, who became the CEO of Merck, one of the biggest drug companies, and Vernon Jordan. And these guys were all four guys who went to Harvard Law. And they happened to be black, and that was a little club. And I had my friend, his name's George. I had George talk to Ken Frazier because I knew they had a relationship, and I leveraged that a little bit whenever I needed to talk to Merck. And I said, I I did this at my company. It might have been even 2% or 3%. I forget what it was. And I basically said, why can't the chemist who invents the thing, who is basically paying the bills for Merck at the end of the day, why can't that guy get a percentage royalty? Not only is it the right thing to do, but the best chemists in pharma are going to come to my company and say, hey, I want to do that. And that sounds good for me. And he said, Martin, I asked Ken. I saw Ken at the White House for some function, and I asked Ken, I said, Martin's doing this thing. What do you think? And he said, George, it's never going to work. And he said, why is that? I said, well, our biggest drug sells $6 billion a year. And so that would mean that I'd be writing this guy a $180 million check a year. And I would no longer be the highest paid person at Merck. He said that with a straight face.
Right. Now, the fact that I asked you this question suggests to you that I think that it's a good idea to pay bonuses to the chemists, right?
Of course.
So,
Well, I think so.
right. Sure.
More so. Well, let me just say this: the CEO of Merck made about 30 million bucks a year, and before he became the CEO of Merck, was he a chemist? Was he a researcher? Was he even a financial guy? He was an attorney.
Yep.
And you want your blood to boil even more? Why did he get promoted? Well, Merck made a drug called Vioxx that they knew was going to kill a lot of people. And Vioxx, they hit those results. And when you do something like that, it's bad news. The tort lawyers, they get all over your ass. And they settled what should have been maybe the biggest settlement of all time next to tobacco. They settled that for $6 billion, which to
Uh-huh.
Merck The Merck board said this is the greatest achievement in Merck's history
Right.
that we only had to pay $6 billion for
Billion.
this.
Right.
We
Now,
thought we thought we were going to get we thought we were going to have to pay $60 billion. So guess what, Ken? You're now the CEO of Merck. You've been rewarded for only having us to pay $6 billion for the worst, maybe one of the worst things Pharma's ever done.
sure.
But
Now,
that's the way our industry works.
so you and I know that it's good to give bonuses to the actual labor as opposed to capital, right?
Well, I think both should get bonuses, but I
Well,
think the
right, but
person
I'm
more the
saying
most
labor should be the one. Capital always gets bonuses. I'm saying labor should as also, right?
of course, and the most proximal to the value creation should get the bonus, not the boss who
Exactly.
had nothing to do with it.
And you know that, I know that. The rest of your industry doesn't seem to really know that, right?
They don't want to do it that way. No,
So, Martin, why should I think that they are smarter than I am and they're the smartest people in the fucking room if they can't figure that out? Why am I crazy and they're somehow sane?
I think that the pharma industry is one of the most stodgy, shitty. A lot of people say, Martin, don't you want to get back to pharma? Now, I have a litigation with the government where they unbelievably, unconstitutionally, in my opinion, banned me from the pharma industry. But I could do pharma in China. I could do pharma in Europe. I could do pharma in Japan. And I don't need to do pharma in the US. If I was a dirtier guy, I could find a straw person to help me do pharma in the US. Plenty of people on this tweet, on this space, would say, "Hey, Martin, I'll do it for you, and we'll establish some kind of system, and I'll be your
Do it for a
front
copy of the
consultant."
Wu Tang record, probably a lot of them.
And I don't want to do it anymore. I like software, and
By the way, I'm gonna hold that to you. You said if I came on here, you'd send it to me.
I sent you the first track, so I will send you the rest.
No,
Um,
I'm gonna DM you my actual email address because I'm pretty sure you're not gonna do anything weird
I
with it.
I'd like you to promise me that you won't send it to everybody else, but
No, no, no,
that's
no.
another story.
I will. It'll be just me and my wife and my two cats.
That
But,
works.
but
But
going back to what you're saying before about how some of my ideas were crazies, right? But what I said in that tweet storm, whether or not you agree with the background of it, but what I said would happen is a thing that would happen, and it would happen for the reasons I basically said it would happen. That
well,
if they could only
that
make 100% profit instead of whatever, they would not produce the drug, even if it could save somebody's life. So, and then I also said, and then you and I agree that it's good to give bonuses to the actual labor that creates the thing and creates value, and the rest of your industry doesn't think so. So, what I have to ask your listeners is, what about me versus your industry? These guys who went to school with Obama and these very Harvard Law and these very, what about me is irrational, and what about them is so much more rational?
it's greed. It's the fact that the guy who's the CEO of Merck, and I said this publicly often, and people who know me and like me repeat it, because I'm a self-taught chemist. I'm a self-taught everything, and I'm a little like you. I love knowledge. I love to learn, and I got patents in chemistry for my work after 10 or 15 years of studying this stuff by myself. Um, I know a little bit about the field. I teach class chemistry on YouTube, and I used to say when Ken Frazier, because he was very critical of my raising of a drug price. Meanwhile, we're a tiny company that needs to raise prices, and we could debate that because we need to survive. We're not Merck. If I was Merck, I would never raise the drug price at 5,000%. But we're not Merck. And what happened was I said, when Ken Frazier can tell me the difference between a nitrogen atom and a carbon atom, which most high school students can, then you know what, he can tell me the difference. He can lecture me about drug pricing, but until then, he should shut his mouth. And I get a little bit of flack for that because Ken is loved in the industry, but
Right.
I don't know why he's loved in the industry because he's never invented a fucking drug. He can't explain drugs to anybody. He's just an attorney. And
But my
I
what I'm saying is that a lot of your probably listeners and a lot of the people who were tweeting against what I was saying make me out to be some kind of, as I put it in another thread, some fucking hippies in the meadow banging a tambourine.
no I I think that
I
we
think that
haven't got to some of the tougher questions that are probably separate us more than you think. I think that what happened in finance is interesting as an analog. The finance industry woke up one day, my old boss, Jim Cramer, his old boss, Michael Steinhardt, George Soros, a bunch of these guys separated. They had the same thing. They had fiefdoms in Wall Street. You work at Goldman Sachs, you make Goldman Sachs 500 million bucks.
Yeah.
Goldman Sachs looks its nose down you and says, "Yeah, good trade. Here's 5 million, here's 10 million. Let me make you happy." But the Goldman Sachs shareholders get the rest, the partners get the rest.
I read
And what
Bonfire of the Vanities recently. I reread it again, so I know that. Yeah.
Well, these guys, the Soroses of the world and the Kramers of the world, said, "This is bullshit. If I start my own firm, even though it's going to be smaller than Goldman Sachs, I want to keep I want to eat what I kill. I want to make my money."
I'm gonna
And the
start my
incentive,
own company with blackjack and hookers. Yeah.
and what would end up happening is these hedge funds, which was a fledgling industry, and they were the cowboys of the industry. They're different things now, but they basically had this incentive structure that was so rich that it attracted not only the best investors, but also attracted the most criminal investors. And it ended up resulting in that these firms would make fortunes while the mutual funds would plod along almost like they're standing still. And the power of incentives unleashed, this much better class of investors. What you think of investing and the fund management industry is incidental. The important thing here is that by giving the talented people, which we presume are talented in the first place, the the fruits of the labor, and of course, capital has to get something for putting up the money. In my opinion, uh, you got a much more efficient industry. In finance, whether that's a good or bad thing is another question. But in pharma, a much more egalitarian. Let the chemists, let the doctors win more than the executive teams are winning. It's anathema. I mean, nobody does this.
Right.
And when we went to Wall Street and we mentioned it, we said, look, we're not going to give them the house, but for them to get a little bit is not such a bad idea. And some people said, look, Martin, they get their stock options, they get their salary. Why? I said, well, I own 20% of the firm. So if they do really well, I'm basically the guy that's going to make a ton of money. And it's just not fair because they're working as hard as I am. And
I don't
they're,
understand why they're complaining. We give them food. We let them have their own houses. We even give them shade sometime in the summer. And the missus comes out on the patio of the plantation and makes them the iced tea. They should be grateful.
I
That's
mean,
what
it's
they.
crazy because they're the same people that we go out to lunch with. I'm standing next to in the office, but I'm getting everything and they're getting nothing, and it just doesn't sit right with me. So give them something to look forward to, and I think it's something that makes sense. The rest of the farm industry doesn't want to do it that way, and I actually got the reason I got indicted, and the reason I ever had any of the problems I've had is the people that really didn't like this were my boards of directors that were older guys, average age 70, and they said Martin wants to pay this guy millions of dollars, and he's just some college kid. And fuck him. We paid our dues in this industry, and if anyone's getting these millions, it's us. And I got into this big fight, and I basically told them to fuck themselves. I start my own new firm, and it was a really wild thing to see. So I think what you're talking about is pretty endemic. I mean, every one of
Well,
these
it's
places
you
works
mentioned
this way.
you mentioned the finance guys and the innovations that they do. And all I'm thinking the whole time you're talking about Jim Cramer and all these guys, Goldman Sachs, is these are the same guys that it was thought it was a bright idea to base the global economy on giving a mortgage to a fucking cook at El Pollo Loco and expecting to make a $20,000 bubble payment after 2 years.
I'm
And
not saying
these are
these
the
guys
smartest
are.
guys in the room.
I'm not saying these guys are, or the financial world is it's worse than pharma, but I am saying that to the extent there's some talent in pharmaceuticals, I'm sorry, in finance, that there are Warren Buffetts out there that are smart and shrewd investors. The hedge fund emergence of hedge funds and this idea that you can get paid for your performance and that there should be a meritocracy and incentivization, it is something that made that industry better. It also created some untoward things, and it is what it is. But in finance, in pharma, they don't do that. In tech, they do it more. If you're a tremendous programmer in tech, you can get promoted, you can get some kind of option thing that makes you rich. it's still not as egalitarian as it should be, or a meritocracy as it should be.
But it's part
But
of the reason that the tech industry dwarfs the pharma industry, as far as I know. The global tech industry versus the global pharma industry.
say it one more time.
I would guess that's one of the reasons that, as far as I know, the global tech industry, not just Silicon Valley, but the global tech industry, dwarfs the global pharma industry.
It's funny you say that because it wasn't the case until about 20 years ago where that started separating. And even in the last 5 or 10 years, it's separated in a big way. And it's partially because of what we're talking about, which is, there was much more meritocracy in tech where it's not hard to start your own tech shop. It's impossible to start your own biopharma shop without letting capital,
That
basically take all of the profit.
that was one of the things that I never understood in the tech industry, and people would get very angry at me for openly saying in tech meetups and startups was I can start a Facebook with my laptop sitting at a fucking Starbucks. Why are you assholes asking for $2 million for reclaimed Amazonian wood paneled fucking desk? What
Right.
the fuck is wrong with you? We don't need capital to do this. We are the labor and we are skilled labor and we don't need capital. Unlike every other industry, I don't need a building. Why are you fucking sucking on Mark Andreessen's cock when you don't need any of that? And especially knowing that while you're starting it up, he's not going to pay your expenses. You're expected to pay your own rent. He's investing in the company. He's not giving you a paycheck. Why the fuck are you doing this? And the answer
Well, the
is
company,
because they
the
cared
company,
more about making money than about making tech.
well, the company will pay you a salary theoretically. They don't want it to be too much, but they will pay you a salary. Peter
Right?
Thiel would always say, your max salary at a company should be 150K at a startup.
No, I know because
Um,
Peter Thiel. Did you ever read NSFW Corp Paul Carr's magazine?
no.
It got folded into Pando Daily. He was a TechCrunch guy. Started an online magazine called NSFW Corp. It was pretty successful for a while, and then Pando bought it. I built it. Like I built the website and the content management system, and
Okay.
I actually co-produced a podcast and wrote a series about going to Mexico to get dental work because I couldn't afford it in America. Which is
What
how
does
it's.
that have to do with Peter?
I'm sorry.
What does that have to do with Peter? Or are you talking about the 250 or the 150
So
max kind of?
Peter was one of the investors in SFW Corp.
Yeah, I mean, I'm friends with Peter and Mark, and I have a high opinion of them for whatever that's worth. But I
Mark
do
doesn't have
think
an high
that
opinion with me anymore. He used to.
I like Mark a lot, but I don't disagree that when he invests in your company, he's trying to make money. Um, and that's I think what he wants to do. But one funny thing I'd say is that thanks to companies like Stripe, who can do your whole payment system with one API when you used to need 5 engineers to do it, and thanks to companies, I don't know if we can thank them, but AWS and some of these other guys, and thanks to AI a little bit as well, you can go from zero to hero. And there's a company called Midjourney that
I
has
know.
gone from zero dollars invested by anyone, and they're now worth, maybe some people say 5 billion, some people say 10 billion, and they did it all themselves. And the employees own 100% of the company. And Midjourney scares the shit out of the venture capital complex
Well, let's
because
say
the question now is like,
let's
well,
example
if these
this.
guys keep doing this, that's bad for us.
Well, this thing that I'm building, this Kowloon. Let's say that it starts to get some kind of adoption by users because it's free and they can, it's open source and it's going to be easy to install on the server, like a Discord thing, whatever. And for all intents and purposes, my title at the company is HNIC, head
Yeah,
nerd in charge.
I use that same title at all my startups. I leave the N ambiguous.
Yeah, I don't because I'm a big white guy from Texas and people make their own assumptions. I am head nerd in charge. It means that for legal purposes and financial purposes, I own everything. I am the sole owner of all of the intellectual property. I'm the sole owner of all the assets. I am the guy. So let's say that Mark or Peter comes to me and says, "Josh, we think this is a winner you've got here, and we appreciate that you built it yourself. You don't need investment to build it. You already have a business that is launched and is starting to get traction. We're going to give you $5 billion to buy it outright from you." Now, unlike a lot of broke ass motherfuckers in this world, this is a question that I actually have to consider because it is within the realm of possibility and has been my entire career. That one of these ideas I've told you about, somebody would want to offer me. I fuck you money isn't the right word. The way I think of it is fuck you money is like $10 million.
Yeah.
$100 million is fuck y'all money, and $1 billion is fuck all y'all money.
Right.
So if somebody was offering me fuck all y'all money, that's where it becomes interesting because I suspect that you and probably almost all of your listeners and probably 95% of people in the world, if somebody said, I will give you $5 billion for this thing, would not even say yes. They would say yes because it had the dude's dick in their mouth.
Correct. Correct.
I'd have
At least speaking for myself.
I would have to sit and seriously think about it.
I have one friend that has $1 billion company that said the same thing, and I just couldn't believe him. And he's a real principled guy. He's a wonderful dude, and I do believe Nvidia offered him uh, billions of dollars for his company, and he turned them down. And he said, Martin, I have 10 million bucks that I took out of the business, and that's all I need to live on for the rest of my life. And we'll see what happens with the rest. It's a fun adventure, but I would say no every single time. And I was shocked because he actually really loves running his company. And people say they do. But when they get to check, they say, look at all the other things I could do with my life: travel, see my kids for once, those kinds of things.
It's occurred to me, but it's like with this thing that we want to do, we have revenue streams for it that are just ancillary stuff. It's not very interesting, but it's stuff that to me is considered ethical. My friend thinks that realistically we could make $1 million a year. Now that's probably an amount that you would sneeze at, but if
Sure.
you offered me $1 million a year to do something good versus $5 billion to let somebody built take something I had made and use it for reasons that I know because I wouldn't listen. I know Peter, and I've met a lot of his friends, Stanton Friedman, all those guys. I wouldn't piss on them if they were on fucking fire, and I mean that quite literally. You, I don't know. Them, I actively dislike. So if it was a choice between doing something that would let Peter Thiel have more money versus giving away literally 999% of the profit I could make, I think I would probably leave that 999 on the table. That's
Well,
how seriously
two.
I believe that it's better to do good in the world than actively do good than to passively do evil.
I think that's fair, and I think it brings to mind two examples, and I wonder what you think of these two. So the first is Craigslist, and the second is WhatsApp, and they
Okay.
both involved selling out because, like you said earlier, they I think both groups didn't exactly have the what in their mouth, but they did say yes eventually.
Yeah,
And I think the WhatsApp guys said yes pretty fast. The Craigslist, Craig, I think was his name,
Craig.
he said
Yeah,
yes
you
more
might.
slowly, but he said yes. He eventually sold to eBay, I think. And since then, I don't know what's happened. They changed hands again or something. But, Craigslist was kind of, when I think of what you're describing, for whatever reason, Craigslist popped into my mind because it's sort of it was very much a DIY thing. Now the world's changed a lot with web programming, and I think your thing will look a lot better. But it kind of the ethos kind of reminded me of Craigslist, and then WhatsApp was a little similar. And the only difference there is that they sold to the evil empire, right? Which, by the way, I don't think Facebook's the evil empire. I love Facebook. I love Meta. I love Zuckerberg. You don't. But when they sold to the evil empire, which I think they viewed as the evil empire, they joined the board of Meta, Facebook, and then they quit. And they kind of quit in disgust, I think. But they also quit with $17 billion,
Right.
which the I'm a big believer of follow the money, and actions speak louder than words.
Right. And the thing is that like I said, I figured out lots of ways to make money if all I wanted to do was make money. Again, to quote Citizen Kane, pimping, for example. Pimping is a real easy way to make money. You're giving people a product that they want, whether or not the government wants it. That's really kind of irrelevant. You can be an ethical pimp. You cannot beat your hoes. You can keep them off the drugs. And I've actually known people who pimped and were fairly ethical at it. More ethical than a lot of people I knew who were VCs or day traders. I could go and sell cocaine exclusively to affluent people and not feel, and I would actually feel less bad about selling cocaine to rich yuppies than I would about selling my company to somebody like Peter Thiel. I would feel morally better about that.
Is it because Peter's a Republican, or why?
No, it's because Peter is a horrible fucking asshole with horrible ideas. All this seasteading bullshit, that fucking third gold ass nonsense. I'm going to go and live on a magic floating pontoon country out in the middle of the ocean where all we use is NFTs to do our transactions and we all blah, 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 blah. And I don't know how to use a fucking hammer. Just childish. Remember that? Remember when they had that thing, that floating thing up in the river up in Northern California, and all the boats got blown away because none of the motherfuckers knew how to moor them? These are not serious people. I do not take Peter seriously. I don't take his political ideology seriously. I've read it. I've read Mencius Moldbug. I've read all that fucking stuff. And it's lunatic nonsense by people who have never been outside of a bubble in their lives. That's the real fucking bubble. Mark Andreessen does not remember what it's like to be poor. And I know because I asked him that. Doesn't remember it. Has no idea what it was like to ever really be poor. Never, ever, ever. Never had to think. I remember once when I was in San Francisco, I had a night, and it's a long story, but basically I had the choice between losing my apartment and letting a guy suck my dick.
Whoa.
Yeah. Now I'm not homophobic. I'm not down with getting my dick sucked by a dude. At least I was 19. I probably would be more experimental now. I lost my apartment because I didn't let another dude suck my dick because I felt like it was wrong. So when I hear somebody like Mark Andreessen talk about profit motive and talk about incentive and blah, 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 I just try to imagine Mark making the choice between we'll even go even better. Losing his apartment or sucking somebody's dick to make money to get his apartment.
I guess I get that, but I also like, okay, they're out of touch. They're super rich, but is it? I guess. Do you think wealth necessarily makes you lose your grounding?
Of course, because so most of the people I know who are really rich, like I said, I knew Tony Hsieh for several years in Vegas when he was doing Zappos. I know, Mark and people like that. I know a few other VCs, Guy Kawasaki, we used to work out of his offices. Most of the really rich people I know, though, are rock stars. I've been friends with the Killers since before they were famous. Their first gigs were at my open mic, and I watched them rise. And because I'm a musician and I was a rock journalist, I know a lot of those people. Yeah, because the writer Richard Kadri has a great line. He says, money is the magic that anyone can do. But what money is it's a magic that turns no to yes.
Yeah.
So I was talking to a friend of mine he's a British guy trying to do a startup here today. We were talking about the same thing. I said, if you or I are thinking, you know what, yeah, I'm really stressed. I just feel like I want to go and sit in Greece for a while in a villa by myself. The answer is no. But for somebody with money, the answer is yes.
Sure.
Right? There is no no. And what's interesting is I know a few things I'm not going to talk about on here because it would be libelous, but I know from Vegas, because everybody in Vegas knows what the rich people get up to. All that happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Maybe it
Yeah.
does, but it stays in Vegas. So I know some of the fucked up shit that really rich people do that you will never hear about, never makes the paper. And almost all of the really reprehensible shit that rich people do is when they meet somebody they cannot change no to yes.
Interesting.
For
Yeah.
example, let's say a stripper in a strip club that a certain famous person wants to fuck him and won't for any amount of money. It turns out that person really doesn't like not having that no and turn into a yes.
Sure.
And so I do think that when you have enough money to turn every no into a yes, no, you were at Hogwarts. You were Harry fucking Potter. You do not interact with the world the same way that I do. You don't solve problems the same way I do. You do not face challenges the way that I do. You cannot, at some point when you've been doing it long enough, you can't comprehend what the world is like when it's almost always no instead of yes.
So are rich people bad, and not rich people more likely to not be bad, and we should do something about it? I mean, I'm kind of curious. It's a big statement.
Well, I know a lot of people who are really into 18th century French designs for execution who have thoughts on that. But here's the funny thing, because I told you I grew up around these people, right? I grew up around really rich people, upper middle class and upper class by anybody's standards. Like I said, Trammell Crow's family, Ross Perot's people, right? I know that those people are not inherently evil or bad, but it's almost like Eli and Morlocks. Do you ever read The Time Machine by H.G. Wells?
Yeah.
So the Eloi, to refresh your memory or your listeners, are in the future, humanity has devolved into two species. The Eloi are really beautiful, and they like to have fun, and they sit around, they play all day, and they fuck each other, and they dance and tra la la and bang on tamarines. They are hippies, right? But they're not smart. They can't really do anything. They just are kind of exist for pleasure. The Morlocks live underground. They're fuck ugly. They're almost you know gorillas, and they're very clever. And they do all the actual stuff. They take care of all the Eloys, the habitats and their food. They cook for them or whatever. But the Morlocks eat the Eloi. That's the big horror in Time Machine, right? That's the big reveal. So I think that rich people are closer to Eloi, like the kids I grew up with. Now, those kids may not be bad people. They may have decent hearts, and none of them that I knew probably grew up to be anything less than very wealthy. But they cannot understand what the world is like with more no's than yeses. And that means that all of their decisions are going to be predicated upon this very, very limited understanding of the world. Now, really poor people are the same way. The people who never hear yes and always hear no, I find that really, really poor people are usually, frankly, just as ignorant of the way the rest of the world is. A lot of them are needlessly belligerent. I'm needfully belligerent, by the way. Um,
I can
and
tell.
but the interesting thing is that America learned the trick of teaching those poorest people that the only difference between them and Mark and Peter and you know Lady Gaga is they got to work for it, right? And you don't want to get taxes, capital gains taxes. You don't want to vote for somebody who wants that, because someday when this hot rod chopper shop you and your cousin want to open up, when that gets really successful and you become a millionaire, you don't want to pay those capital gains, do you, Bubba? And the guy sitting there on his couch going, no, well, because he's got some really good ideas for how we could make like we're gonna make a cycle that looks like Ghost Rider, and then I'm gonna get rich, and then I'm gonna have capital gains, and that's gonna make me real mad because my money's going to the black people, and I don't like them because I've never been to a city, and that's the problem with the poor people is they're just as fucking stupid. There's a very weird strata of people kind of dispersed throughout the working class and middle class who are smart enough to realize that both of these are really fucking stupid ideas. And it's people like me. I'm a leftist, but I'm not a tanky. I don't want Maoism. I don't want Leninism. I just want people to not die because they can't afford fucking medicine. And the fact that that is a thing that people consider me to be eccentric for saying.
No, nobody wants people to die.
No, but what I'm saying is that I want people to die less than I want people to have the freedom to make as much profit as they want. If it is a choice to me between me saying to you, no, I'm going to tax you at 95% progressive tax above a certain income because life is not fair, right? Martin, we know that. Life is not fair. Can we agree on that?
Yeah.
So why not make it massively unfair for the poor people for a while? Why not absolutely, totally, shamelessly rig the fucking game so the people who have been shat on and fucked with their entire lives, let's just give them stuff for free for a while. Why not? And when I say that, there are people who look at me like you're evil and you're a communist and you're the devil. And all I'm saying is, if you're rich at a certain point, you don't need more money, but your money can make people not die. And I think that that's probably a better use of your money than you buying another mega yacht. And I'm the fucking devil for that. I'm crazy for that. How
I don't think you are,
the fuck?
but but I think there's a few things that need to be said. The first is that we do that, and at least the Republican in me is saying this. We do that. We have progressive taxation. We have Medicare and Medicaid. We have all kinds of other welfare systems.
I've been on
Uh,
Medicaid, by the way, and
Not great.
not
It's
great.
not great.
And you have to basically have no income to get on it.
Correct.
You have to
Correct. It's
literally
not
be.
great.
I was one step from being indigent, and that was the only way I got on it for 1 year, because I made just enough money that I got cut off.
It is not great. But there is that the idea that yes, we do a little bit of that. But the other question I want to ask you is, if you're in this unfortunate position where you become very wealthy, um, what do you do to not lose this mooring, to not lose this perspective that I guess you feel is so important? And I'm not trying to be too sarcastic, but you obviously prize that. So, what would you suggest people do if they find themselves in this position where they have 10 million, 100 million, $1 billion? How do they stay either grounded or keep that perspective, or should they avoid trying to become wealthy? And then the corollary question, of course, is, well, should we stop people from becoming wealthy as a result? And then finally, the overarching thing here as an economist is, well, how do we? It sounds fantastic, but how do we stop inflation from happening if the money is redistributed? Money loses meaning to a certain extent because everyone has the same amount. So it ends up sort of distorting potentially, what are goods, what are services if money is more flatly distributed.
Well, you're right. And inflation is one of those things that happens in a free market, that you can basically, the more authoritarian your state is, the less of a problem it is. But I take your point. So the answer to your question would be, number one, I think that you should try to make as much money as you can by doing better in the world rather than making it worse. Now, a lot of people really can't tell the difference. They can't think that through, and I get that.
Agreed. Agreed.
Well, that's fine. But if you suddenly find yourself rich, if that chopper that your cousin made that looks like Ghost Rider that takes off, everybody buys one, and suddenly out of nowhere you find yourself wealthy, what I would say, number one, is um, vote for the people who want the most taxes on you, because then you know that your money is going to, at least in theory, people who need it more than you. Now, is government efficient? Not necessarily, but I've seen one of the moving to England from America is amazingly enlightening, because back in the 80s there was a demon that inhabited this land that went by the name of Margaret. And this demon, Margaret, the Thatcher, they called her,
Hmm.
sold off all of the public transport, all the utilities, and a lot of the public housing, um, based on some bullshit about being better for the people. So it turns out that, and maybe it's just an ethnic failing of the English, who knows? But it turns out that these people made everything more expensive, made it worse. And now, I don't know if you follow the news in England, they're having boil orders for the water because Thames water just lets too much shit drip into the River Thames and the River Colne and all the rivers of England. And the beaches are unswimmable because they are literally covered in human feces. Now, this would not have happened if the people still owned it. Maybe people would pay a little bit less for water, but they also would be able to, drink it. And the trains, that, because the problem is that as soon as you start having a public good that is being handled for profit, there's no way it can actually be cheaper. And it will tend always, because of this whole growth thing we've talked about, the price will always go up no matter what, unless it's Costco hot dogs, which is an anomaly in magic. But the point is that now there are some of the labor people, though unfortunately labor has become as centrist as the Democratic Party, who, by the way, I have no fucking use for. Um, but there are people in labor who are saying, all right, well, we're going to win this next election by the landslide because the Tories are short bus riding motherfuckers who have ruined this country and brought it to the brink of collapse. So we're going to reprivatize or republicize, seize back these public utilities. And it's fascinating because absolutely no one in this country says that's a bad idea. The most staunch conservatives, the most my grandfather fought at the Battle of Britain, and I don't like it when people come here and don't speak English, and I those guys, they love that fucking idea. And the funny thing is, you'll find that those same people, those same dumb shit, they call them gammon here, which is sort of like a redneck, right?
Mm-hmm.
They love the NHS. When you say to them, you know what, let's dismantle it and do it for private, and you have to buy your own insurance at whatever the insurance company wants to charge you, like in America, and the most Oswald Mosley, dick sucking fascist fucking Nigel Farage ass motherfucker will go, Jesus Christ, no. God, to be like America. It's funny because Americans still believe that everyone in Europe desperately wants to come to America, that everybody's yearning for the shores of freedom. And a few years ago, I looked something up I thought was really fascinating. I looked up how many people from the Scandinavian countries had immigrated to America in the first decade of the 21st century, 2000 to 2010. Yearning to be free of the yoke of socialism and socialized medicine and socialized public transport and socialized everything. And the answer was, in those 10 years, about 800 people. And most of them, it was for marriages. Nobody
Mm.
wants to come to America, Martin. Nobody wants to come there. America is the world's.
Well, some people do. I
Well,
mean,
sure, no, some people do, and some people think it's going to be like Iron Man, that they're all going to go hang out with Tony Stark. But the truth is that educated people in the rest of the world regard America as the planetary trap house. It's really fun. No, everybody knows. Like, is it true that you can just shoot a gun whenever you want? I'm like, yeah, I'm a total lefty and I gun control guy, and I have a preference between the AK-47 and the AK-74 because you can get better ammo easily in the world for the AK-47, but the 74 does more damage. Yes, we actually do all know about fucking guns, bro. Everybody wants to come to America. They want to shoot a gun at the gun range in Las Vegas. They want to fuck strippers. They want to eat a 50 fucking ounce steak in Texas and ride a bull. And then they want to go back to their country that's run like a sane place instead of a fucking whorehouse. That's the truth. I don't know anybody here with any kind of education who would ever want to live in a country where profit is the only thing that matters. And we can lie in America, and we can have our politicians get up and talk about, well, we're going to make some more, we're going to get a couple more parks in the city. Nobody buys that shit. Everybody knows that in America, cash is king, and it is the only thing that matters. Like you said, there's nobody at Vertex who wants to see children die. And I don't believe that they do. I don't think that they're sitting there going, well, you know what? Fuck the little bastards. Let's go out and have steak and kick them while they're down. I don't actually believe that. What I think is that at some point up that chain, somebody there thought, I want to make more money more than I care about children choking on their own bleeding fucking lungs.
I
And that,
think that they care about both.
but the problem is that they cared about one more than they cared about the other. And that to me
Well,
is
what
when you
what
get
I
down
what
into
I
evil.
what I'd be curious about, because I don't know. I know a lot of people that work there and worked there. What I'd be it, you know, you're an investigative. Well, maybe you're not an investigative reporter, but you're a journalist,
I used to be.
and yeah, you know how to research things.
Do you know?
I'd
Do
be
you know about the people who live in the storm drains under Las Vegas?
I don't, but let me finish this thought. I'd
I'm
be
the reason people know about that. That was my point.
Oh, okay. I don't know that specific thing, but that's interesting. I bet you there's something like that in New York.
Oh, I know.
Um, the um, the thing I'm asking is, I would like to know the real story, which is what journalists are supposed to do, of how many people at Vertex, or I'm sorry, how many people in America. We can worry about the other countries later. It's important. But how many people in America can't get a Vertex drug, even if the number is one, or two, or five, or 12, something like that, relatively small number, because I think the number of people on the drug is something like 20,000 or 30,000. I'd be curious. if one, the company would be willing to tell the truth, which I am, and willing to say, look, we have the best system we can think through, but there will be somebody that falls through it, and that somebody is a tragedy, but we will do everything in our power to stop that from happening because we care about people. Because who are these drugs for? If they're not for all of us, they're for our cousins, our brothers, our sisters, our mothers, our friends, people at our company. Somebody eventually is going to have cystic fibrosis here, right?
And
We want everybody to have a shot at getting the drug, or not just a shot, but a guarantee at getting the drug. So I'd be curious if somebody actually did the hard work of asking this question. How many people exactly couldn't get access to the drug but wanted it? And that's a hard question to answer for obvious reasons.
well,
Uh,
it is obvious reasons, but to specify it, it's one of the reasons is because there are no records kept of that because people don't. And I'm not saying the company particularly. I'm saying that nobody in our society wants those records kept.
yes, but as a journalist,
You can
for
find out,
records,
and
I was going to say, there are
mean,
ways to find
I could
out.
sit, and do. I mean, for example, I could look for everybody in America who died, and the cause of death was cystic fibrosis, and
There you go. That's a smart thing. Yeah.
I could go and do this, and it would take me a couple of years, and I could do it. And then, Martin, Josh Ellis, all 6'3", with the word anti-fascist tattooed on my chest, and my earrings, and my big beard, and my limmy-looking fucking punk rock ass, is going to show up at Vertex and say, "I have some questions for you."
Yes.
And they're not going to answer them. They will answer it if it's somebody who goes, I've always wanted to get into working in PR for
Right.
the industry, which is part of the reason. Part of the reason that journalism is dead in America. And
Well, and they'd also,
my
the second
colleague, half
you,
my colleagues just went into PR straight out of
oh,
journalism.
totally, totally. And the second that you show up, they're going to call one of those people and say, hey, we have a hit piece coming, and we need you to write a counter hit piece before this hit piece comes out. And
And
they're going to try
unfortunately,
to
no,
scoop
and
you and do everything they can to silence you.
people have done that to me before as a journalist. Think about how I've spoken to you while we've been talking. This is how I speak when I haven't thought about it, when I'm not writing it down. So PR puff pieces don't work on me because I don't do passive aggressive. I just do aggressive. So if somebody wrote a puff piece countering my argument, I just simply look at everything they say and I say, you are fucking lying. This is not true. I have no reason to be deferential to you or courteous. You are making shit up, and here is the data that proves it.
But if they put that in the Rolling Stone, or something like that, the New York Times, and it's this wonderful puff piece about how great Vertex is, and it gets 50x the views that your story gets, that's one of the effect. That's what I would do if I was the Vertex CEO. I'd say, great, this guy's going to destroy us. Before he gets the chance, I'm going to go ahead and see if I can get. Hey, John, do we have one of these guys on payroll basically at the New York Times? Oh, yeah, we do. Okay, we'll get that guy to go ahead and I'll give him exclusive access to me for 72 hours. Nobody's ever had that. He can meet with 8 of our scientists and promise him that, if you can, that, we'll take care of him some other way down the road too. And all of a sudden the Puff Piece comes out. It comes out eerily the same day yours does. And it's, seen by 10x more people possibly. But of course, that's not always the way it works. But it's a way to soften the blow or neuter it. And then flat denials. He got it all wrong. He never talked to us. He tried to talk to us, but we gave him 3 dates and he didn't take them. So it's his fault.
No, no, no,
There's
no.
so many
And I
spin
agree. And,
controls.
and what's really interesting, though, is if you look at, we'll take this back to my original tweet storm, right? My thread. So a lot of people said what you initially said, which is, I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
And yet, what I discovered was after a while, I wasn't the one who was responding to them. It was people who had read my tweets
Yeah.
who were going out and going, well, no, that's actually what this article says is how things work, and this is how the R&D thing works. And because everybody was saying, well, it costs money to make drugs, and you're just ignoring that, and people are going, no, well, actually, there are ways to write it off and subsidize it, and here's the tax things. And what it turned out is if you are a clever, funny motherfucker who is incredibly articulate and good at conveying ideas simply, you will win eventually. And maybe if you even if you don't even win at first, you're going to get more people paying attention to you because you don't come off sounding like a PR flack than
That's. I mean,
people
I think
PR.
you're right. I think all the spin damage and sorry, spin whatever you call it, damage control and spinning only goes so far, and the truth does come out. But let me ask you something that I think our listeners would be interested in. What price should the Vertex drug be? One, and the sub question, and maybe I should just ask these one at a time. Um, well, let's start there. What price should it be?
All right. Well, so when you were saying 50 a dose, you were talking about an annual dose, you said?
Yeah, let's argue for argument's sake that, and I'll dress it up a little bit. For the $300,000 drug, it's $1,000 to make the annual dose.
Okay. So $1,000 a year.
Yeah.
What I would do if and by the way, and I will do this for any of your pharma companies if they want to pay me to do it. I'm more than happy to actually do this because it feels like it would be on the side of the angels and they would probably pay me decently. I would go and find this disease, and I would find cystic fibrosis is an odd case because it particularly hits children, right?
You're born with it, and if you're lucky enough to become an adult, you're lucky enough to become an adult.
Right. So you can't go and look at these kids' W-2s. You have to look at their parents.
Yeah.
That's tricky, but I'm really fucking good at data. I could find that shit, right? So what I'd do is I would go and I would get all these children that I could find with cystic fibrosis, and I would find the poorest, let's say 10 of them. And in America, that's going to be real goddamn poor. There's probably going to have people who are on
Sure.
their kids on Medicaid, but they live in a homeless encampment, which is
Yeah.
something, by the way, I know a lot about. Um, so I would go to them and I would talk to them like a human being, not like a researcher, not like a professional, like wall of neutrality. I would talk to them. I would sit down and say, I'm a smoker. Do you smoke? Do you want a cigarette? And I would talk to them and I would say, all right, here's the deal. These people make this drug and it can save your kid. They want to make money off it. And that's fine. I understand that. I understand wanting to make a profit. I really do. I keep telling you, I swear to God, I'm not a Maoist. But
I believe you.
they also don't want your child to die because you live in your car. That's a fucked up reason for your child to die. It's unfair. And in a society where we can fix things, we should fix things. That's
And I want to say that the lawyers at the company and the PR people at the company really don't want your child to die either because they'll lose their jobs.
right. But that doesn't matter to a guy who lives in a car. He doesn't give a shit.
No, but it is kind of one of these ironies that I
Right.
think the PR person is more interested to some extent that if that came out, their number one concern would not be the death of the child. Their number one concern would be how the fuck did this make the front page of the New York Times? I am fucked. This is fucked. You
But
know,
the number
they
one
wouldn't give a
concern
fuck.
is whether or not they could spin the death of a child into something positive or at least not negative.
Yeah, they
Which
wouldn't care about the kid.
which again, morally, that's pretty much rent a gun by a bullet territory as far as I'm concerned. But that's just me. I love Jesus. I don't actually, but so I'd go to this guy with his kid, his sick kid, and he's living in the car, and I'd say, "Listen, all right, so what if I were to tell you that for $2,000 a month, or a year, 200, what was that come out to? 180 a month, something like that.
Yeah,
Your kid can live. Could you come up with that money? And if not, how can I help you figure out how to come up with that money? Because what works for that guy will work for everybody else."
sure.
And I would go to the company and I would say, this is what the guy who lives in the car with the kid who's dying of cystic fibrosis, this is what the most that he can possibly do without without his child dying of starvation. Because again, externalities, right? Like if you say, well, the guy can, sell the car and he can buy the drug, great. Then the kid's sleeping on the fucking street and is going to die anyway. Do you see what I'm saying?
But you're not suggesting that should be the price of the drug.
No,
Are you?
I'm saying that if the price that he can pay, let's say it was, you said it was what, 180, right? So if I said, could you pay $300 a month for your kid's life? Could you find that? Could you scrounge it? Could you get it from family? Could you do that? And the guy said, yeah, I can do that. Then that's the price I'd give him.
I see. So somehow we're, and I'm going to be a little sarcastic here because my audience probably expects me to be as snarky as possible and try to carry a new one. And you're a pretty smart and snarky guy too, and it would not get us anywhere to be snarky. And it
Yeah,
might be entertaining for some
go ahead. It's
people.
like like upset me. I'm a big boy.
Yeah, no, I understand, but I don't want to devolve into uncouth idiocy.
I'm
Um,
You're fine.
the point that I think most people would say is, so are you seriously proposing that there's a price for every individual person, the different price?
Well, I'm proposing yes, but a lower price than your stakeholders apparently think there is.
So it could be a rich guy could pay 50,000, or maybe you suggest it should be 300, the original price, and a poor guy pays a different price.
What I would say is that those are questions that I don't feel like I can answer. I can tell you what the right thing to do for the poorest people are. What you charge the rich guy, if you can figure out a way to get him more money out of him, have a fucking ball. Go crazy with it. Play jazz. But I'm telling you that this is what I would do for the poorest people.
Now
There,
I think that's what we do. That's the funny thing. I mean, I you're a busy guy. You're not in great health. I don't think you want to do an article about Vertex, but I think the idea is that Vertex, if I had to guess, probably spends out of their corporate treasury. I was about to say out of their own pocket, but that doesn't sound right. Out of their corporate treasury, which is overflowing with cash, by the way,
right.
um, they probably spend 10 to 20 million bucks a year servicing patients and getting them drugs, and they're not servicing people who are Microsoft employees who have the family plan, the Cadillac Aetna Plus plan. They're servicing the people who, you know, and I think this is where it kind of breaks down. They're servicing the lower class, but they're not servicing the homeless. We had a patient that was undocumented, and I had to overrule the entire company that we had to get him our Daraprim, the toxoplasmosis drug I raised the price of, because he didn't want, the guy was so nervous, he wouldn't put his name down on any of these forms. He wasn't going to give us proof of income. He wasn't going to give us anything, not even his name. And I said, listen, in this case, I want you to FedEx the thing to, that happened to be in Boston, FedEx it to Boston, and they're just going to give it to him. And we had a Boston sales rep. And if you had to go hand it to him in a paper bag, that's what you're going to do. And my lawyer, who was the general counsel at Bear previously, said, over my dead body. And I said, it's going to be over your dead body if you don't let it happen, because it's going to be over this guy's dead body. And we need to do the right thing here, because I'm also being pilloried, by the way. But I'm also, I think that's the right thing to do. We sent drugs to Venezuela during their sort of very disruptive, almost civil war, which was very hard to do because we saw an article in Bloomberg that said somebody couldn't get a drug, not our drug, mind you, a totally different drug in Venezuela. And I saw it and I said, we actually had a population of South American scientists in our company. And I said, I think we can get this done. And we got it done. Not every company's like that.
No,
Uh,
okay, yeah, right. No, no. So let me ask you a couple of very silly Socratic questions, if you will.
yes.
Is Vertex the only company that makes drugs that people die if they don't get?
Absolutely not. There's probably 30, 50, 100 companies like that, at
Okay,
least.
okay. Out of those companies, how many of them have policies that, like you said, like getting the undocumented guy the drug? At a guess,
Oh,
I don't even need an exact number, but at a guess.
so the difference being they'll help the guy in Alabama that's got a $12,000 annual income. I would say the percentage of those would be 75 or 80%, maybe higher. And then in terms of the undocumented guy,
Mhm.
I I don't have a great guess, but it's probably closer to 10 or 20.
Maybe, yeah. How about homeless people?
I think that if they could, there's different kinds of homeless too, right? I think if they could prove income and they had documentation and all that bullshit, it's back to that original 70. But if they're homeless the way you and I maybe think of some homeless people, it's probably close to that 10 or 20.
Right. Now it's interesting because I had several tweets go viral this week, which is completely unexpected to me.
I noticed that. Yeah.
But one of them, the one that got up until this one kind of went crazy, the one that had a lot of hits, 76,000 likes, and let's see, what was it? Where was it here? I can give you the exact numbers. Yeah, so 78,000 likes, 8.4 million views, 6.9 thousand replies. Was about the other thing that I'm famous for, other than discovering the homeless people living in the storm drains in Las Vegas, co-writing a series of articles that got me nominated for a Pulitzer along with my co-author. In 2018, I figured out that I could go out to these homeless camps in Las Vegas, which are massive, as I'm sure you can imagine. I could go to the people there and ask them what they needed that charities didn't provide. Because charities provide food, water, right? And they
Not everything. Yeah.
not everything. And so the thing that they told me, and it may surprise you, and it surprised a lot of people who read the thing that I wrote, the thing that most of the homeless people asked for was flashlights.
Hmm.
Um, for reasons that, if you think about people camping and trying to avoid being seen by police or violent people or whatever, it makes sense why they would want flashlights, right? But none of the charities had ever asked them about this, and I did. So the innovation that I had, which I'm frankly very proud of myself for, you're familiar with Amazon wish lists.
Yeah.
Turns out you can put bulk boxes of toiletries, flashlights, socks, tampons, any of that stuff on an Amazon wish list, give it to the public. They can order it, but it gets shipped to your house. Where if you're somebody like me, you can spend a couple of hours on a Sunday stuffing bags full of this stuff, and then a few more hours going out to the homeless encampment and giving stuff to these people for free. Um, I tweeted on exactly how to do it step by step if you want to do this in your town, whatever. Now, the point of this is that in my life, not only have I temporarily been homeless myself when I was young, but I have also spent a great deal of time with homeless people, not as a charity worker, not as a social worker, not as a cop, all of whom are people who will tell you about their experiences with the homeless, just as a guy literally sitting and having a cigarette with them and giving them a stick of deodorant and talking to them. So one of the reasons that I stopped doing this after a few months, because it was working, we were helping people, but it was, it's band-aids on bullet wounds, and I knew that from the get-go. But the problem was it made me so depressed, and it made me want to kill everybody that I talked to, like when I went out to a bar. I just wanted to beat everybody to death. It's like what Anthony Bourdain said about, if you ever visit Cambodia, you'll never want to stop beating Henry Kissinger to death. If you spend time with homeless people, you will never want to stop beating the petite bourgeoisie to death either. And that,
So the idea is that, like, when people complain about, oh, my Netflix, I can't believe Netflix was down, or this show on Netflix
no,
sucks,
no, no,
or
no, no. It was nothing that obvious. It was that these people, a lot of them in America, um, everybody thinks, well, they're all drunks or bums or whatever, and a lot of
drug
them.
addicts. Yeah.
Though the interesting question that nobody ever asks is, were they before they went on the street? And the answer is often as much no.
Hmm.
But I saw people with Down syndrome. I saw elderly people who couldn't work. One of the worst ones that I saw was a man who was probably in his 70s, maybe 80s. He was a double leg amputee. Uh, and he was wearing a white suit incongruously, like a linen white suit, like Panama Jack style.
Hmm.
And he was in a wheelchair, but it was a a hospital folding wheelchair, not a permanent wheelchair. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he had fallen out of his wheelchair into the mud, and he had shit himself. So he's this white suit of his with the legs rolled up around his stumps, the stumps and the legs and everything. He's covered in his own shit. He's covered in mud, but he has senile dementia. And when I went to ask him if I could help him, or if he needed me to get him back in his chair because I couldn't tell if he fell out or got on his own, he waved at me and said, "It's my birthday next week. Are you coming? You going to come this year? You come every year." And
Hmm.
Martin, that fucked me up. That
Yeah.
never stopped fucking me up. And I remember a few years earlier there was a video of a homeless guy in LA who had been in the hospital, and he kept coming in, he kept coming in. Um, he had a colostomy bag. And finally, one day they got tired of him coming in, and there's video of this because unfortunately they got caught on security camera. This guy was also double amputee, by the way, with a colostomy bag. And these two orderlies pull up a van down on Skid Row, 5th Street, Los Angeles. The two orderlies come out. Each one picks him up by an armpit because he has no legs. They drop him on the sidewalk. They walk away. And the rest of the video is this guy dragging himself by his elbows down the street with his colostomy bag torn open with shit dragging down the sidewalk. Now, a lot of people look at this and they go, it sucks. To me, my question is, who the fuck let that happen, and why are they still allowed to have all their teeth?
Well, I don't disagree, and let me tell you a story of my own. It's a little less. I'm not a poet or a writer, but it's as impactful to me. Uh, there's a disease called PCAN, pantothenate kinase associated neurodegeneration.
Okay.
It's a very, very, very rare disease, and the patents I've won revolve around this disease. And it's a bizarre disease because it's a vitamin processing disease. Vitamin B5 is essential. It's called pantothenate,
Right.
and it's essential to survival. And these children, because they don't make it to adulthood, they cannot turn pantothenate into phosphopantothenate. And this is a fairly trivial chemical reaction, but it's not fairly trivial to cure the disease. But in essence, my theory was if you could replace the sort of prodrug or the metabolite they're missing, then you can cure the disease. And our animal data suggested that was true, and all of this sounded really great. There's 3 children who are brothers who have this disease, and it's almost certain, unfortunately, that they're going to die a terrible, slow, agonizing death. And so far, they've been in this terrible, slow, agonizing part. And I can't imagine what their parents are going through and so forth. This is a disease that maybe 500 people or 1,000 people have in America, if that. And to make a drug for 500 or 1,000 people, well, it costs a lot of money. And the price that it would have to be to make it a rational thing to do is an enormous amount. It may even cost something like $1 million per patient per year. And even that might not cut it. But our company went and embarked on this. And by the time that we got through enough of it, I had a fight again with my board. Mostly what I believe, their story's a little different, but I believe it was largely over compensation of individuals at our company and their relative compensation, which as a board member, as you may know, in corporate America, you get paid, but you don't get paid like the executives, and nor should you,
Right.
because you're there to just check boxes and shit like that. And at least that's my view of it. They didn't think that was their view of it. They thought their role was extremely important. And we had this big fight, and it ended up with me getting indicted, but it also ended up with that project was basically abandoned. And very few pharmaceutical companies will even think about saying, well, technically we can make this work if it's $1 million a patient, because maybe we'll make 50 million or 100 million doing this. Merck and Pfizer say, it's not worth it. Even in that egregious scenario where it's $1 million a patient, Merck says it's not even worth it, even there. And the parents, these are the Kulzrid brothers, and you can read about them. Local newspapers have written about them. The Kulzrid brothers and their parents, they absolutely don't care what the price of the drug would be, especially if it was, of course, covered by insurance. And the insurance views it as, okay, we're going to get a 1 in a million times, result of getting a patient. We got to write a check 1 out of 1 million times. That's fine. That's not a big deal. They do this with other drugs. There's a $2 million drug, in fact. So they say, in fact, not only do we not care, Martin, we're your biggest fans. If you give a shit enough to make a drug for our boys, you're our hero, because nobody else is doing this. It's the first drug ever invented for pecan. There's 7,000 diseases. Most of them are not type 2 diabetes. Most of them are these weird diseases that nobody has, and a few of them are fatal. And this is one of them. And even crazier than that, a few of them have a straightforward solution. And to me, that's a tragedy that there's a straightforward solution here, but no one who wants to put one and one together, because you know what? What's 500 people's lives? To me, every life's important. If it was my child, it's the most important thing there is. So it's an example of a lot of things, but one of the things it's an example of is, one, it's corporate greed gone wrong at our company, and I'm not the greedy one. And it's also, the idea that a $3 million or a $1 million drug could actually make sense and have everyone cheering it on along the way. Which, again, my story was about this. The reason that I'm unfortunately was the face of pharma, was because of this 50, what is it, 5,000x price increase.
Right.
And I have my rational explanation for it that I don't think involves greed, but nobody wants to hear that. This old saying about journalism, which is, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story, which unfortunately, has become more and more common. In fact, I had previously raised the price of a drug by a large amount. And the New York Times reporter called me and he said something funny. I'll never forget this. He said, Martin, tell me why this isn't the worst thing ever. And it was a wonderful thing because he gave me a chance to explain it. And I explained it. And no article was written. And if anything, the patients that, in that circumstance, the drug was no longer being made because the company just didn't bother making it. They just don't want to make it anymore because it was such a shitty, irrelevant drug to them. And I took it and I said, listen, I'm going to charge more, but I'm going to care that it's being made because it's relevant for my company. And, this is a weird little disease that doesn't have too many people using it. And the drug's going to be a lot more expensive, but I'm going to make sure that nobody can't afford it. I'm going to do my best at least. And, it worked out, and I actually did get plaudits for that. But the time I did it with the HIV drug, not only did I not get plaudits, but I became the most hated man in America.
And
And it was just such an unusual feeling. And I fueled it more because I thought it was surreal. I thought this has to be a mistake. This has to be a joke. Nobody can take this seriously, can they? And so I kind of almost leaned into it because I said to my friends, you guys know I'm not a monster. Let me lean into this. And how funny would it be if I almost leaned into it? And I did that because to me it was so preposterous. And maybe that's a little bit of autism showing or a little bit of just not being able to read people or whatever. But I leaned into it more, and the media didn't stop and say, okay, this guy's hamming it up a bit. There's no way that this is really the story. Let me look into this a little bit, or at least let me stop, writing these articles. We put our article out and it's over. No, they kept they kept saying, let's use this for fodder, for clicks, and for things like that. And we don't need to tell the story. In fact, one of the funniest things was that they said this was a life-saving drug with no alternatives. That is not true. There is a very cheap alternative to that drug. It's called Bactrim. You might have even taken it at some point in your life. Bactrim is about $6 for one full course, and it is proven to be just as good as Daraprim. We did not want people to know that. We wanted people to pay for the Daraprim.
right.
One of our biggest fears was that all of our doctors would switch from Daraprim to Bactrim. But the media did us a great favor, business-wise at least, by repeating this line that there is no alternative to Daraprim, and that they didn't even mention Bactrim because that would undermine the story. The story wouldn't be that interesting if it was idiot raises price of drug to 750 when you could easily take this $6 drug.
I
That's
I think
a
perhaps
funny.
the thing that you're you're not that you're failing to understand here, and I don't mean that. I honestly don't mean that in any kind of shitty or condescending way. Is that the story wasn't the cost of the drug in the middle of some of the worst income inequality in world history. You know, you can talk about poverty or whatever, but the same stats as poverty is lowered, income inequality has also risen. That's just statistics. I think that the time that you got in all this trouble was around the time that Thomas Piketty's thing came out, right?
Yeah, yeah, just around that time, yeah.
Right. And so more and more, and this was not too terribly long after the economic recession. And so basically, in the middle of all of this, people being more aware that Occupy Wall Street had happened and everything had happened, you decided that you thought it would be funny to double down at a time when people really didn't have a whole lot of sense of humor. And the story wasn't necessarily about the drug, it was about you as the face of this industry, because, like you said, you were willing to talk and the rest of them weren't. Um, Sounding, whether you understood it or not, or meant it or not, you sounded like exactly what I called you in my initial tweet. Yeah. And that got their attention because that was the story. Now the story wasn't about the drug itself. It was the fact that somebody in the industry was so blisteringly tone deaf as to not understand somebody who had been given the ability to be a spokesperson, or who had been allowed by the industry to be a spokesperson, could
Well,
be.
I didn't ask for that role, by the way.
No, but you, when they came to you, you didn't pawn them off on a PR guy. You talked to them, which for your own reasons, and I understand that. But that you were this tone deaf about this and so flippant about it, or
Well, it was
sounding so
actually
flippant,
it was rational to me, and
right?
I think it was rational to most people who knew the field, but it was a story, and that story was 5,000%, which is a number that sounds like a lot, but as I've said to people, well, 5,000% is a lot, but what if the original price was so low that 5,000% actually isn't a lot? And
No,
we actually,
no, I
yeah.
get that. I totally understand that, and I can see where that made sense to you. But the story wasn't about pricing; it was about, in the middle of all of this social recognition of inequality, here's a guy from this industry who doesn't realize that he sounds like the biggest cunt who's ever walked the planet. And when you tell him that, instead of going, "Oh Jesus, okay, well," or appearing not to, even if you did it to some of the people, you also, to some of the journalists, went, like you said, you doubled down on it. You went big with it, and that's what the public saw. It wasn't about the journalists necessarily. The journalists were telling a story, but it was a story that wasn't. They weren't telling the story you thought they were telling, and you didn't. They weren't telling a story that you wanted them to tell. They were telling a story to a public that was already wanted your head on a platter, along with everybody on Wall Street. And when you,
Well, not everyone thinks like you, by the way. There are people, who supported my defiance
I agree,
for just defiance sake, which isn't that intelligent. But then there are people that said, look, what right does anybody have to tell you what you should price your product at? You decided that this is the price, you have your reasons. Why should I be complaining about it? What role does the media have to play in this? It's
right?
your choice to decide, the price of your
And
product.
those people agreed with you, and everyone else in the world went, "You know what? Fuck those motherfuckers too."
Yeah,
That's what I'm
yeah.
saying. Now, having spoken to you, what I realize is that the guy that I was so eloquently swearing at was the guy that I had seen, the guy who doubled down. Not you, Martin Shkreli, the guy that I'm talking to. I was talking to the guy that to be perfectly honest, kind of allowed and maybe portrayed yourself to be, even if you didn't mean to, if you didn't
I mean,
understand.
I still defend my price increase, right? I haven't backed out from that.
Right.
You
And
know, I
now
believe
that,
it was rational and the best thing to do. And
no, and that's a thing that you and I can maybe disagree on, but respectfully.
yeah,
That guy, I don't call a cunt. It's that other guy, and that's talking.
well,
And
well,
now,
and
and
here's
now
the
I actually,
problem.
having spoken to you, I kind of feel bad about doing it because it wasn't you; it was that guy that I was calling names. Does that make sense?
And this is an extremely common phenomenon for me. That's really I'm almost so used to. But I think that what's funny about it all is that I never started out as the cunt. I went on television and tried to explain it, and what would end up happening is I'd either get goaded by the media, or I'd get I remember doing one like 2 hour interview with ABC. And I said to my colleagues, I said, "This is it. This explains it all. We're going to be vindicated." And we all sat around watching ABC. And what do you know? They did a maybe 2 minutes, if I'm lucky, 90-second piece. And the 90-second piece had maybe 3 seconds of me. And it was the time of the interview where I was, kind of the worst 5 seconds of the interview, where if you talk for 2 hours, you can say something dumb. In in your worst 3 seconds will be pretty bad. And they picked the worst 3 seconds, and it was just a hit piece, and they had zero interest in telling my side, because I think that the financialization of the news media isn't exactly a good thing either, and that's why
No.
then
And here's what's funny: if there were any left, and there really aren't, but if there were more local newsrooms around and people who were journalists the way I was a journalist at the Las Vegas City Life, um, they hate those people as much as you do for the same reasons. Because those people, the people on television, are not in the business of journalism; they're in the business of entertainment,
right.
right? And no, and that's just always been. And there are exceptions. I mean, you talk about 60
Sure.
Minutes, Ed Bradley, whatever. But by and large, they're basically people who failed upwards from modeling for the local fashion barn in Sheboygan or wherever the fuck they came.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, almost everyone on CNBC. I always say this, and I abhor CNBC more than virtually any other, place. If you flip on CNBC for 2 minutes, which I'm sure you have zero reason to do, everyone on TV on CNBC is drop dead gorgeous,
yeah,
and they're almost all women, by the way, because the average trader who watches CNBC is a man.
yeah.
Now they have some dudes there too, of course, but it's the weirdest thing. You've never seen a fat, ugly, bald guy on CNBC. And it's the strangest thing to me because, they're everywhere else is a little more homogenous and a little more equally distributed. But in essence, they are selling a weird mixture. And you may have noticed this as well. They took the commentators, or whatever you call them, from behind desks, and they gave them, in many cases, the women, short skirts, high heels, and they
Yeah.
put them instead, not behind a desk, but behind, some kind of they're on a couch or they're on some other kind of
And
chair.
you know who else
Where,
noticed that? All of
yeah,
the women journalists that I worked with.
yeah, and it's a weird thing, and it's a terrible thing, and it's made ironically, it's had some bad effects too, because now nobody trusts journalists, and it's gotten to a point where, look, I'm thankful for it to some extent, because people now take my side more than ever, and they say, they really dragged you through the mud for no reason, and I sit there and I don't say exactly what I want to say. I said thank you for that, etc. But I also think in the back of my head, like, look, 5% of it there was good reason, or 10%. So I agree with you most of it, but it's to the point where they're like completely, you're the best, etc., etc. I said, look, I'm no saint, but I agree with you. But then they look at the next guy and they say, like, guys that maybe go in Joe Rogan, or I mean, I consider Tucker Carlson a great friend, but other things like that, where they look at somebody that did something else and they say, well, the government hates this guy, so I love him now. And it's like, look, sometimes they do get it right. The media hates this guy, and the government seems to hate this guy. So now I love him, and vice versa. Fauci, for example, is a government guy. He's a CNN guy. They love him. So you know what? Fuck Fauci. He must be a criminal, and we're going to prosecute Fauci, which is something that you see on Twitter. And I'm just sitting there like, man,
But
I don't know if I agree with that one.
the thing is like your boy Tucker. And by the way, tell Tucker if he ever wants to find out what the taste of Texas dicks tastes like. I'm his Huckleberry. But somebody like Tucker is a fucking lounge act on television who is playing to an audience, and he knows who his audience are, the Fox News audience, and they're the kind of Americans I grew up around. I am not a coastal elite. I used to, like I said, I used to live in. My dad was a
Since
lumberjack
he,
in Wyoming, and
let me say this: since he got kicked off Fox, he is actually doing some real journalism.
all right. So, um,
Listen, he got a seat with Putin.
yeah, no, oh no, I saw that. That was a kind of journalism. If tonguing someone's asshole on television is
Oh,
journalism,
come on.
my God, he is the
He
new
at least sat down
Edward
with a
R.
guy
Murrow.
that has not sat down with an American in a long time, and he got to record it. I mean, I don't
Much
think he
like the
was
guys
looking.
at Vertex wouldn't sit down and talk to me. Putin wouldn't talk to an American. He would talk to Tucker
Fair enough.
Carlson, who would clean his asshole and his colon out with his tongue.
I, I,
But
I
my
think
point
he
is
was.
that they're playing to an audience. They're not journalists. There were television journalists, people like Edward R. Murrow, um, and the person who killed all of that, really in America, by changing the rules of the game, was of course Rupert Murdoch.
I was going to say Ted Turner.
Well, Ted Turner too, sure. Ted, but Rupert was the one who got it so that the fairness in reporting and all that stuff went out. Newspaper journalism never had those same kinds of deals, so you end up with a lot more newspaper journalists who tended to be more balanced or more honest because they also had, instead of 30 seconds to tell a story, they had 5 pages.
Well, they had integrity, and integrity was an important thing,
And
and they
then
were gumshoe, dogged, kind of like investigators, and then because it became such a financialized industry, what I often find, and I know this is not news to you, but there are honest reporters out there. I had a friend at the New York Post, and she would talk to me, and then I'd read the article, and I'd say, Emily, what the fuck is this? And she said, my editor. I said, what do you mean, your editor?
the one thing
I work for my editor.
every single editor I've ever worked with knows that their basic job is to take out 50% of the word fuck from my articles. But if they change the meaning of it by one fucking iota and make me say something I didn't say, I'm going to show up at their desk with my dick out, and there's going to be some screaming.
Well, you have that kind of power. 3-year-old, 3 years in the industry. Emily did not, and
No,
I would have this really cordial, wonderful conversation. I agree with everything, Martin. This is going to be great. And I read the headline, and it's like, "Pharma bro dickhead," says X Y Z. And I'm like,
I mean,
Emily, what happened to this?
do you
And
remember
and
when
the
the
journalists are
do you remember,
the editors are now running the show at most of these places, and they often have agendas, and it's
it's
shitty.
but it's not editorial in a lot of cases. It's editorial is put in by private equity guys, or I can't remember that the name of that company that owns all of the
Yeah, you're not wrong.
anymore.
I mean, the guys that bought all the Gannett,
That's yeah.
the
Now
Gannett papers,
now
Alden Global.
right now I'll give you an example. So do you remember when the Raelians claimed that they'd done human cloning?
I'm sorry.
The Raelian, the French Canadian cult claimed that they
Oh, yeah, sure, yeah.
so they did that announcement in Vegas, and I was a columnist, and my editor thought it would be funny to send me over there. He thought that all I was going to do was go, oh, look at these fucking weirdos and their bullshit. But again, I'm not a biologist, but I have more than your average layman's understanding of basic things, and I can read pretty easily. So I grilled their guy on what claims were, how they claimed to have done it, and came back and said, I think that there is about a 10% chance that these people have actually done this, but they're actually stupid enough to think they can get away with trying to make it proprietary, but they believe in a space cult, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily didn't do it. I think it's 90% chance that it's absolute bullshit, but I didn't do what every other journalist around did, which was just go in and completely blow it off.
Yeah,
I knew that they
disregard
were
it. Don't kick the tires. Don't
right.
even talk to them. Yeah.
No, they're nutballs. Of course, they're nutballs. They believe that their prophet Rail went on a spaceship and he has a fucking weird ponytail and dresses like a Doctor Who villain. No, probably not. But let's investigate this and treat it at least, even if you don't take them seriously. Let's at least ask the questions. What is it to spend 10 minutes of my life talking to this PR cult weirdo? And that was always my belief as a journalist. Now the problem is that newspaper journalism, the City Life left years ago. The other, I'm not sure. I'm not even sure if honestly if the Las Vegas Weekly is left, but the other ones that were in town, they all folded because no.
Oh, it's over. Yeah, it's over
And
for newspapers.
so what you end up with is this horrible scenario where we have TikTok journalism, which makes Megan Fox look like fucking Nellie Bly. I mean, or Megan Kelly, whatever. Megan Kelly makes
Yeah.
it look like Nellie Bly. It TikTok journalism makes television journalism look in depth and unbiased, right? Because any fucking Fruit Loop with a phone can go and call themselves a journalist now, and it's degraded. And so there may be a point at which history recognizes you as being somebody who was a casualty of that. Now, I personally, to be perfectly honest with you, Martin, I think if you didn't want it to sound that way, you probably shouldn't have talked to them, and you should have known. And I understand that you didn't, but you should have known that if you go on television and you say, "Who would think that I would kill a baby?" They're going to edit it so you just said, "I kill a baby." That's how they fucking work.
I was a little naive. I do think, thankfully, social media has provided an opportunity to explain yourself, which is a fantastic thing. One of the things that hasn't provided, though, and it's amplified, and I don't like this guy, but Joe Rogan, for example, has become this because it's a vacuum, and there's a substitute for journalism, and it's Joe Rogan who is largely an idiot.
Bro, do
And
you even
he
bro,
is
bro? Bro, have you done like DMT, bro? Have you ever like heard like the fucking machine elves, bro? Like I heard this one guy say that was created by like fucking Norwegians because fucking Norwegians are trying to control the world, bro. And like I don't, I'm not saying that, bro. I'm saying that's what my bro says, bro.
and
Fucking,
he's funny, he's charming, he's interesting,
I've never.
but when push
I remember he wasn't he on Fear Factor or some shit. I
right,
never paid
that's
attention,
right.
but
But when push
I'm a
like
guy
he
who's never
tries
watched an episode of a reality show, even when I was in one. You know what I mean?
right.
No,
I mean, I always loved Howard Stern, so I don't mind the zany kind of like fun, irreverent thing.
he
But
just
he'll
seems like
often
a fucking
have
himbo.
I get it, but like he'll off. The point is like I don't whether you like all that other stuff or not. It's one thing, but when he talks about the news and he tries to like come up with alternative explanations for things, and people believe it not because it's believable because it's often not. And I'm trying to think of a recent example. It could be something about nutrition that's zany, or something much worse, like an explanation for some gigantic phenomenon that's very unlikely to be that explanation, but basically a conspiracy theory.
Right.
Uh, you know, people believe it because they lost trust in government. They've lost trust
No, I
in the
understand.
they've lost trust in media, and they've lost trust in rationality, which is like
We are in a
uh,
post-rational age. I absolutely agree with you,
you
but
know, and
you,
it's not good. It's not good for anyone. And I think that I don't know that there's a solution.
I think that one of the things that I don't know if you know who he is, but you might get a real benefit out of reading, especially some of his later interviews. One of my few kind of people that I really admired and kind of idolized. He died recently. He was a musician and producer named Steve Albini. You know Albini?
Albini blocked me. I was a fan of his works,
Yeah.
but he didn't like me, evidently.
Well, if you remember Albini's work in the '80s, I listened to Big Black a lot. I've just always have. I'm a fan, and as somebody who produces music and records music, and he was just the guy, right? And so a lot of his stuff in the '80s, like for example, there's a song called "Steelworker" that I love, and he says, I've never hung a darky, even a big one. I've never seen an Indian on a horse." Now the thing is, Albini was not a white supremacist, quite the opposite, right?
I wouldn't think so. Yeah.
But like there's a song on the one I was listening to today. I can't remember the name of the record, but called "Passing Complexion," right? Um, he wrote one called "Jordan, Minnesota" that sounds like it's really cheering on a child sex ring. The thing about Albini was that he knew that anybody who knew him knew that he wasn't like a pedo and he wasn't a racist or whatever.
Just like Kanye. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Kanye, I had no use for long before that. He's not a fucking. People act like he's the world's greatest producer because he raided your fucking dad's LP collection. I don't give a shit about Kanye. But the thing is that what Albini didn't realize, much like me when I started tweeting this stuff using these sort of not very maybe the best example of trying to explain what I was doing, was that it wasn't just the 5 people who knew him that went to Big Black shows who were hearing this. There was suddenly some guy out in Utah who got a copy of the Big Black record and went, "Yeah, fucking darkies, man. I don't like fucking darkies."
This happened to Cobain too. Yeah.
It happened to Cobain too. And the thing that Albini said was he realized it not only was it wrong for those people to assume what he meant, it was wrong of him to say it. And it wasn't wrong now for him to keep saying it. It was wrong for him to say it back then because he was saying it because he didn't. His only defense was, I didn't understand how far my voice could carry.
That's so interesting. It really just clicked for me. Huh.
So when you said, you said these things and people took them wrong and you went, well, I'm going to double down on it or I'm going to push it. It was like Albini used to do back in the '90s when people would call him on his shit and he would call him out as being hysterical fucking, loony, like crazy activist types. He said, because to me and my friends, there was no gay bashing. We didn't see it. It didn't happen around us, partially because we wouldn't have tolerated anybody doing it. It never occurred to us that it happened. So when somebody would say, this thing you've said is homophobic, I would say, what the fuck are you talking about? This isn't causing violence because I never saw it.
Right. Right. I mean, in our case, it was me and my colleagues. We worked all day long. We didn't do anything else. And we said, don't they know about patient assistance? Don't they know that Joe in the patient assistance program is such a caring individual that he will never let anybody not get our
And do
drug
you
for
remember
free?
earlier when I was talking about those blinders that we all wear, that narrow field of view? Martin, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and I tried in other ways, tried my hardest, but I obviously, in retrospect, the better solution was like Albini said, which is I shouldn't have said it in the damn first place. I put my phone number out on the web, and I said anybody in America that has trouble getting my drug can call this number. This is my personal cell phone number, and I would rather die myself than you not get this medicine. What happened? Well, a bunch of trolls called my phone. And I would literally call them and I would answer them and say, well, I put this phone number out for people who need my medicine. And by calling it, you're actually potentially harming this. And they'd say, hoo, faggot.
Right.
And, they'd, hang up.
I
And
used to get I used to get people calling me. Somebody found my phone number when I was a columnist, and they put my number on some storm front board or whatever, and so they start calling me on that, and they're like, these guys are like, why do you love Obama so much? That's like that. I'd answer the phone. That's what they'd say, and I'd say, well, I could tell you that it was his foreign policy or his economic policy, but I just want a huge black cock just spurting fucking jism all over my fucking.
ah,
I want that Michelle's pussy in my fucking mouth. I want his cock in my ass. I want him to fucking tag team me. I want him to fucking.
you are a vulgar guy.
No, because these are guys that call my house at 9 p.m. So fuck them, right? And the funny thing was when they would start to go, never mind, you're cool. One of them, I said, so how you doing in Houston? And he goes, how'd you know I was in Houston? I said, because you're on caller ID, dumb fuck.
Oh, that was my favorite thing to do. I'd put guys on speakerphone, and I tell them where they're at, and they thought they were using like some special blocker, and I'd
Yeah,
pull up their Facebook
yeah,
profile, and I'd say, "Hold on, I'm CCing the principal of your high school right now.
exactly.
Let me give. I
I
want you
used
to tell him what you just said to me."
I used to get death threats from right wing people constantly on Twitter, constantly. When I was in America, like I had a tweet that went viral where I said I think there's more courage in a trans kid who can walk into their high school every day with their head up high than any fucking sissy bitch who needs a fucking gun on his hip so he can go walk in Starbucks and feel like a man.
That's probably true.
It probably is true, but there was a guy who said he was going to come and kick my ass. And I said, all right, I tell you what, coffee bean and tea leaf at Harmon and Maryland Parkway, 9 a.m. tomorrow. I know you can't really figure out perspective and size from my Twitter, and I know you think I'm some little soy boy. I'm a big redneck, and I'm going to beat the living fuck out of
I,
you and
It's
film you.
funny. I had the same exact approach, except unfortunately, I'm 5'9" and about at the time was 140 pounds soaking wet, but I still had the attitude.
No, no, no. But the,
And
the thing, the thing is I really am as big and mean as I say I am, and
I,
I'm really good at
I bet.
fucking violence. I'm amazing at it. You could ask anybody who knows me. So this guy says, "Well, it can't be there by 9." I said, "All right, I tell you what, 9 p.m. in the parking lot of the Hundredth Tavern on Charleston and Maryland in Las Vegas. I will be there, and you can come and beat my ass if you think you're fucking man enough." So the guy says, "All right, I'm driving out from L.A. or San Diego," and he starts tweeting at me as he claims, I'm at a gas station in Reseda or whatever. And I'm like, all right, cool. You know what? I'm here. And so I sat there waiting in the parking lot. And I said, all right, here's what we're going to do. For every minute this silly asshole doesn't show up, I want all of y'all on Facebook and Twitter or whatever to donate $1 to the Trevor Project, which is for trans kids suicide prevention, right? Well, this dumb shit had given me his real name. So I said, I want you to donate $1 in his name. And then when he doesn't show up, all that money he will be going in his name to help them. And if he does show up, I am going to absolutely fucking prison beat his ass for even fucking trying this shit. And I will fuck him up. I am so good at fucking people up. I've done it so many times just because I used to fuck up Nazis. It's just fun for me. And I've got missing teeth because I don't have dental care. What are you going to do to me that God didn't already? You're going to knock out these remaining teeth? Thanks. You just saved me the extraction, motherfucker. Let's dance.
I'm Albanian, and we're known for one thing: it's our belligerence. And people would often call me and say, "Hey, Martin, I'm downstairs in your lobby," and I'd say, "It's apartment 18H. Come on up, pal."
Yeah,
And
no. You want to do the man
nobody.
dance? First dance is yours. And the thing was, the guy, of course, never showed up. But this has happened to me so many times over the years that, and I would always give him a place and time, and I would always be there because I was going to fuck you up. If you showed up to try and attack me for something I'd said on the internet, like a fucking idiot, I am going to beat your ass, and that's going to be how you were reminded not to be a fucking moron. Pain is the great teacher, and I am the great pain teacher.
Well, we have a lot in common then, other than one thing, which is I'm always secretly hoping they don't show up.
Oh no, I would have loved to do that dance with those boys. I mean, somebody who's going to drive 200 miles to beat me up because I said a thing on Twitter they didn't like. That's somebody who deserves to be out of the gene pool. And if I can make even
I just have confidence that there are none of them have that kind of courage. When I was indicted, there was a lot of pressure on me to take a plea deal, and I said I'm not guilty. I didn't do anything. I One of the biggest things I did, Josh, that you might not know, is that I fought with Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton quite a bit.
oh, I
Hillary Clinton
remember.
even, yeah, she even ran a World Series ad, which couldn't have been cheap,
I
about me.
remember. I'm a Bernie
And I
bro.
called and I called my friend who I mentioned earlier, who had this White House connection, and I said, "Look, man, I'm getting attacked by Hillary. I'm getting attacked by Bernie. What does Obama think about all this?" And he said, "I'll get back to you." And he goes and sees Obama for apparently a weekly poker thing, and he says, "Martin, I talked to the president." I said, "What did he say?" He said, "He doesn't give a shit, and it's not an election year for him, so he doesn't give a crap."
Which
I
is
said, "All right,
right.
well."
But But going back to Albini, though, the thing that Albini that I think was what really affected me was I had a very good friend who died last year, but he was a poet in Vegas named Chip Mosher. Um, there's a Marvel editor, I think, of the same name, but not him. But my friend Chip, when I was younger, he was kind of a mentor to me, and he said that his absolute hero in life was Malcolm X.